All right. Looks like some folks are trickling in as well. Okay. Welcome everybody. We hope you've been enjoying the 2024 BRIC Summit so far. I know this is the last session that we have for the day, I believe. So appreciate you all joining us and hanging out with us. Yeah, awesome. Hello, Jasmine. Hello, Amy. Nice. So we've got some really special guests here with us today. Can't wait to be able to dig in with them. But before I do that, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Narbeh Minasians. I am one of the members on the advisory board for the BRIC Foundation. We have been putting together this summit for I would say 8+ months at this point. We started shortly after the last one, so lots of thought and lots of effort that's been put into this. I can't believe that it's almost over, but here we are, and I think we're going to be going out with a bang. What do you think, panelists? You think we're going to go out with a bang? Yes. Look, I'm seeing smiles and thumbs up. Excellent. So, I'm excited to jump right in, but I want to just kind of give everybody a reminder. We do have the Q&A feature here on this webinar. So if you do have any questions for our panelists, do not utilize the chat, utilize the Q&A features in particular, so we can make sure we're tracking all the questions that are coming in, and we'll do our absolute best to get to them afterwards. We got a lot to share with you all with some pre-discussed questions that we want to review and make sure that we're maybe proactively answering some questions for you. And then if there's anything outstanding, we'll try our best to get to that at the very end. So with all of that said, I want to pass it off to our panelists to be able to give a little bit of information about themselves, just as an introduction. We're going to find out more about them as we go along, but just as a top line, who you are, what you're doing right now in the gaming industry, and anything special or something noteworthy that you would like to mention about yourselves as well. So because I have Christina first on my screen, I'm going to pass it over to her to take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina. I'm the Senior Creative Director for Valorant at Riot Games. I started my career as a visual effects artist, so my background is completely in gaming, and I've done visual effects. I moved into art leadership, eventually art direction, as well as production leadership before becoming a creative director. That's it.
Thank you, Christina. I'm going to pass it over to Devon, who's next.
Cool. Also at Riot as a creative director, I'm in the R&D world though, so working on unannounced projects and new games. Been at Riot for about 8 years. I started on Valorant when it was in its R&D phase as well. Before that, worked on a few Call of Duties, and before that, worked at Blizzard on the cinematics team. So kind of always been in the also kind of art leadership, but came up through environment art and environments and stuff like that.
Gosh, we got decades of experience just from the two panelists alone already. That's fantastic. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Vincent, who's next.
Hello, my name is Vincent Perea, and I am a studio art director, currently at a studio called Possibility Space. I've been an art director, I've been in games for like about 15 years, and I spent a good chunk of time working for Disney at Disney Interactive, and then kind of jumped around between big studio and then indie studio throughout my career. I got my start actually as an illustrator and then concept artist, and then kind of worked my way up to being an art director and now a studio art director.
Awesome. What a great journey. I can't wait to dig in with that a little bit later too, Vincent. And then next I've got Genese.
Hi, everybody. I'm Genese Davis. I am a senior narrative designer at Avalanche right now. I was a senior writer on Hogwarts Legacy. I've written for other games like Ari and the Secret of Seasons. I've also been an author and a writer for TV series. But before that, I was also a banker, and I worked at a horse barn and taught horseback riding lessons. So I have a kind of a bizarre career history, but I'm excited to get into that a little bit because I feel like it gives a lot of people hope if they're in a myriad of different career spaces and might want to transfer over.
That's right. Yeah, I bet we've got tons of folks that might be looking to make a transition in their careers, just like you did too. So some great stories all around, I think, about that particular subject coming soon. And last but certainly not least, Laura, passing it over to you.
Yeah, hi. My name's Laura Hohman. I am a narrative manager at Magic the Gathering at Wizards of the Coast up in Seattle. I have been there about a year and a half, so I'm like the tabletop card TCG side of gaming, which is pretty fun. Before this role, I spent the last 12 years in TV animation in LA, so I have a background that's similar but not really gaming. And I kind of moved up in the industry through texturing. So I was a texture artist, a lead, and then a CG soup, and then I transitioned over into TCGs.
Awesome stuff. Yes. Lots of intertransferable skills that I'm sure we'll be able to get to later on too in our discussions. And then before we move on any further, I just wanted to remind Devon, you do have your Adobe front and center in your screen. We were joking about that earlier. We got some notes in the chat too. So I don't know if you wanted to bring it back down or not, but I love that he's on display. He's like a bonus panelist with us.
Yeah, I'll try and blur him, but
No, you're good. You're good. You should keep him on. It's fun. Awesome. So, let's jump into our first question, for the day. We wanted to hear from you on what a day in the life looks like for somebody in your position, or a week in the life. Perhaps kind of diving into folks that you collaborate with, different teams that you work with, just giving us a little bit about background about like what it looks like to be in your role at this time, so folks can kind of understand what they can aspire to one day. So let's kind of stick with the same order if you all don't mind. Christina, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Sure. My job in general is like very varied. So there's the creative direction side of things, which is like at times I might be reviewing art or VO acting or music or a storyline, something like that, and giving feedback on that. I might also do that for marketing pieces or esports. But then there's also the other side of my job, which is very much about like managing and leading my organization. And so my day might also include like one-on-ones, coaching people in terms of like their people management challenges and that kind of stuff. So that's like generally what my day-to-day looks like.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Christina. I'm passing over to you, Devon.
cool. Yeah, it's interesting because Christina works at like a scaled team, like a very large team, and I'm now on a very small team. So even though we have similar titles, our day-to-days are pretty different. So I'm kind of building up something from scratch and trying to find some pretty senior people to help solve some pretty unknown problems. A lot of art directing at this stage, which is pretty cool, and a lot of just like experimental stuff working with all disciplines essentially across art, so characters, VFX, environment, all of that stuff. Yeah, so a little bit smaller, a little bit more scrappy, and maybe one day I'll have the challenges of dealing with all the other crazy stuff that Christina gets if we actually make a fun game. But yeah, that's basically the day-to-day. Pretty varied as well.
Thank you very much, Devon. Vincent, passing it over to you.
Cool. Yeah, my day is actually fairly similar to Christina's. I think the big, the big difference is, my focus is just purely on art and managing the art team. So usually in the first thing in the morning, I meet with my creative director and our narrative director, and we talk about our current ongoing projects or priorities, answer questions, and get aligned. Then I'll meet with, throughout the day, I'll meet with most of my leads. I work with a multidisciplinary group of artists. So I have 3D artists on my team, concept artists, I have environment artists, I have technical artists, animators, and VFX people. And so I end up like kind of trying to check in with all of them and just making sure that their work is going well. And if they need any feedback or if they're blocked on things, then I try to like facilitate, their work for like an easier production. So usually in the morning is like meetings, checking in with everyone, reviewing work, and then after that, I'll take some of the work and do draw overs or, corrections, things like that. And then in the afternoons, my schedule tends to free up because my studio is all remote. And so there's a lot of East Coast people. So I get a little bit of a window to actually put together briefs for new projects. So that'll be like putting mood boards together, rough sketches, things like that. And then on the really great days, I will get to do some concept work or some in-engine work myself. Although on a team at my scale, it kind of gets few and far between. It's only if like, there's something specialized that I need to do, or I'm trying to cover for other people. A lot of my job is trying to make sure that all the other talented artists I work with, like, are empowered to do the work that they need to do.
Awesome stuff. So I feel like I'm picking up a connective tissue here which is that you need some pretty strong people skills the higher up the chain that you get, in terms of just helping to be able to manage team members, to be able to make sure that their needs are being met, and that you're helping to guide and direct them to be able to do the actual work as somebody that is supervising or looking after some of the projects that they're on too. That's great.
Totally. Yeah.
And then Genese, passing it on to you.
Yeah, I love that you said that, Narbeh, because it's like with video games, I love how many pieces of the puzzle are happening all at once and how many departments are working together all at once. And I really feel like that kind of nailed it with how my day-to-day feels, where I'm trying to help combine narrative and design. So I'm constantly talking with all kinds of different strike teams or departments to get their goals in my head along with the player's experience in my head, and then kind of combining and shepherding the narrative design experience for the player. So it is a lot of meetings. It's a lot of hearing and listening to the goals of all of the different pipeline departments, whether it's combat, whether it's narrative, and then using the scope and the utility that we have, and then thinking, of course, for me, player first, advocating for player experience first, and how to marry all of that.
Yeah, that's not no easy task either, right? You gotta have your head in all sorts of different people's minds, and thinking about from their perspective, in their shoes as well. Laura, how about yourself? What's your day-to-day like?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump on the same train as everybody, is that there's a lot of people and a lot of discussing, a lot of one-on-ones. So as a manager of the narrative team, it's a lot of like advocating for my team across other teams. So besides just talking with my own narrative designers and making sure they have what they need to get their work done and they have their clarity and support, it's talking to other teams like our game design team or editing team, or just so many teams that do so much, even recruiting, if people are hiring, and really making sure that, my team has what they need, but the other teams have what they need too. And so it's super collaborative. My day they're usually very busy. There's not a lot of free time right now, which is good. It's good to be busy. But yeah, just a lot of one-on-ones, a lot of kind of project management, a little bit, making sure things are moving and flowing and that we are hitting our deadlines. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. So
It is. It never ceases to amaze me that there are so many talented, creative individuals working in this industry, and everybody wants to be consistently creating, but it is such a collaborative effort, and there's so many people involved with just even a single game, not to mention at an entire studio and all the supportive teams that are helping to bring this game to audiences to be able to make sure that it's done right and according to the law, etc. And that like connection and that collaboration is so key. So it's almost like I wish I learned in school that like I needed to make sure that I was working on how to work with people just as much as working on a craft in particular, or like fine tuning my specific discipline too. And it sounds like that is something you all deal with, especially in your leadership roles today too. Awesome. So just to jump on to our next question, we talked a little bit about how some of you were able to enter into the gaming industry and how you guys got your some of your first gigs. I heard that a little bit in your each of your intros. I'm curious if we can kind of dive into that a little bit to be able to give our audience some meatier insights. So let's talk about how we got into the gaming industry and that, or transitioned into the gaming industry, perhaps from another career. So Christina, I'll pass it off to you. Would you like to tell us?
Yeah, absolutely. After high school, I was pretty directionless, if I'm honest. So I took some classes in community college. I took some classes at Noman, but I never actually pursued like a degree. I'm completely self-taught. At the time, there were a lot of like DVDs, not much education available for gaming in particular. That said, I grew up playing games, so I knew that was something that I was interested in. So I basically taught myself enough to get an internship, learned a lot while on the job, and that's basically how I got my start in games.
Love it. Self-taught. That's incredible. Devon, how about yourself?
Yeah, a little different. Like I always wanted to work in games or movies, like ever since I was a kid. I always figured I would go to Noman eventually, Noman School of Visual Effects. But I kind of drug my feet a little while, so I always say my job, my last full-time job before Blizzard was Sonic Drive-In. I was like living with my parents in our basement, and like I was working in fast food, and it took me a little while to kind of get out to LA and apply for the school and stuff like that. But I did a 2-year stint over at Noman, learned a bunch, and just really got lucky with my first job there. Blizzard was hiring a lot of juniors at the time, and that was my first job, was working in the map painting team at Blizzard Cinematics.
We, better late than never. That's what I always say, Devon. Sometimes it just takes, everybody's on their own journey, so we all have to find our path forward.
Totally.
Vincent, what about yourself?
So I went to a traditional art school back in early 2000s, and I was studying to essentially be like an editorial illustrator, so to do illustrations for magazines and record covers, things like that. And I'd always loved gaming, but I never thought I'd get into it, because there was another guy that went to school with me who did like kind of like traditional game art, and drew a lot of like barbarians and demons and cool stuff like that. And they got a job at Blizzard like right after school, and I was like, okay, cool, I'm not that dude. So after school, I did a lot of freelance illustration, and I was up in the Bay Area. I came home and met up with an old friend who had an internship at Disney. Disney had started an internship in collaboration with like USC, and they basically were just getting younger people together into a room, like designers and artists, to come up with new game concepts. And he was in the second cycle of it, and I thought that was really cool. So I sent him my portfolio, and then I found the job and I applied to that job and got it. And then that's how I got into the game industry. And it was really great because it aligned better with the kind of work that I was doing, than like kind of opened my brain into, there's like a lot more to gaming, and gaming had kind of opened up at that time. But honestly, like networking, that's kind of how I got in. It's like I knew a person, and then I just jumped on the opportunity.
Well, you gotta be nice to everybody. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Genese, how about yourself?
Okay, Narbeh and I had a conversation a couple days ago about my journey into gaming, and it's pretty long, so I'm going to try to like make it super short. So I was thinking about how I could the highlights of the 10-year-long break-in that it took me to finally have a full-time career in games. And I broke it down into basically like 3 parts, which is work ethic, facing my fears, and learning when to say yes and no. So the first part about work ethic, I realized has really helped me in my career, because I started my first job when I was 12. My mom and dad couldn't afford for us to ride a horse, and they said, if you want to ride a horse, you got to go get a job. And so I started working at a horse barn when I was 12, and I never stopped working. And I think that's really helped me find joy in work, and to find joy in having a really hardy work ethic. But basically, I went from working with horses from 12 to 22 to working in banking, because I wasn't making enough during college with the horse thing. So I grabbed another job with banking, worked my way up from a teller to a manager in banking, and thought like, all right, this is going to be my career. I'm going to be a banker. I'm making money, and it's draining emotionally, but the heck, I'm still able to pay my rent. But I was still going to college at the time, still trying to get my bachelor's degree at the time. And it was actually one of my professors that was an English professor, and I was taking an English class, that said, hey, you have kind of a interesting perspective on dialogue. Have you ever thought about pursuing writing or dialogue further? And it was just that little seed, that inception seed, that stuck with me for a really long time, which brings me to my second point, which is facing your fears. I was terrified to change my major or make a decision going from a sturdy job like banking to a creative career like writing. And it took me a very long time to face that fear and decide to change my major and go for it. So I just wanted to highlight that, because for anyone out there that's doing one career and thinking about changing a career, I feel you. I know that feeling in your stomach where you're like, what am I doing? That's crazy. But I do want to underline that I tried to do it the safest way, which was keep my banking career, keep going to school, but then write and work on a creative craft on the side. So I spent all my nights, all my weekends writing books, practicing short stories, writing TV episodes from my head, movies from my head, just literally practicing writing while I was also working in banking. And that's what leads me to my third point, which is learning when to say no and when to say yes. Because what happened is I ended up writing a book about a girl who goes head to head with a hacker in an online game. And at the time, I had just started playing my first online game, which was Final Fantasy XI. This was back in 2002. So I wrote a book about Final Fantasy XI, but kind of in my own version. I created a video game that was similar in my head and wrote about this girl who went head to head with a hacker. And I was offered a book publishing deal for the book, but with a caveat. The publisher said, hey, we really like this, spin on video games and hackers and online and on MMOs, but we want you to change your female hero to a male hero. And I was stuck, right? Because I was like, okay, wait, here I go. Like, do I just say yes and do this and get my break in? Or do I say no because I really wrote this book for a purpose? It was for myself. It was to highlight, a woman in gaming, a woman in this kind of an industry. And so I ended up facing my fear and saying no, like I didn't take the deal. And it was the hardest decision because I felt like I was sabotaging my own 10-year effort of trying to get into a creative career. And now here I had an opportunity. So why was I saying no? So it was, again, really, really difficult to make that decision. But in my heart, I felt like it was the right thing to keep the hero a woman. That ended up landing me on a panel to talk about women heroes in books or in mediums. And I met a game columnist who asked me to write for game columns from that panel. So that's how I started my very first foray into gaming. And that, after another 5 or 6 years of writing game columns, I started writing for games as a game writer. So I wrote for games like Artie and the Secret of Seasons, and then I kept getting jobs in the gaming industry from there. So I just kind of wanted to highlight how it was a very odd way of getting into gaming, but it included things like always leaning on my work ethic, really knowing like when I needed to face my fears and push myself outside of my comfort zone. And then, of course, trying to stick to your guns when you feel like there's something that you really want to highlight in the industry, like women in games.
Love that. Thank you for sharing that awesome story, Genese. Those 3 principles, the work ethic, facing your fears, and knowing when to say yes or no. I think those are applicable to all of life's challenges and just all of us on our life journeys as well too. Laura, what about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Minnesota. I went to school in Minnesota, an art institute for media arts and animation. During that time, I knew I always wanted to move to LA and work at one of the big animation studios in LA. I didn't know anyone out there or how to get there from the Midwest, and we had some alumni visiting for the VFX program, not animation, visiting our school who were in LA and working. So my big thing is just like networking. Always talk to people and make connections and be authentic with them, because you never know who's going to be able to help you or how you'll be able to help other people. So the visiting alumni from LA, she and I hit it off, and, I'm going to always say, like, pay it back and pay it forward. She helped me get my first internship at a studio, a VFX house in Culver City. She let me sleep on her couch with my 2 cats for a month while I found housing. It's just to her and her kindness that like I was able to move to LA. I was able to find my first job at Nickelodeon, and that really kind of set me up to have my long career in animation, where I kept trying to network, meet people. It's a really small industry. Like everyone's like 1 degree from each other. So like it's good to continue to broaden your network. And then at some point about 2 years ago, I just was ready for a change. I'd been living the TV animation life for a long time, the episodic life can definitely get tiring because you're, making new content every week over and over and over again, and it's exciting and fast paced, but I was really ready for a change. So I did some interviews just everywhere. I was curious about gaming, and the interviews were super fun. It was a great culture. I actually interviewed originally at Wizards of the Coast for their Arena team, which is more of their CG video game that's PC, and that wasn't quite the right fit, but I kept in touch with the recruiter, and this came along as another opportunity that kind of matched my skill sets. And funny enough, you know, my team, quite a few of them are also from animation. So it was just skills are easily transferable, and yeah, you just have to show up, show confident, and just stay in touch with people. I think is the easiest way to really start building your network and finding opportunities.
Absolutely. And I've known Laura for many years, and if it's one thing she's excellent at, it is networking for sure. So great work on that. That's great advice. So for our next question, it's really clear from the questions that are being asked in the Q&A, as well as some things I'm seeing in the chat, that there's a lot of interest in just understanding what the best path is when it comes to schooling and education, what major you should take, etc. So rather than going one by one, I'm just going to open up the question to any of the panelists who feel strongly about one thing, one side or the other, or if there is a side. What are your thoughts on schooling for breaking into the gaming industry? Is that something that's important in this day and age? Go for it, Vincent.
So I would say it's not the only path to do it, right? I mean, one of our panelists, you know, didn't go to, I think Christina was talking about not necessarily going to college. My mentor didn't go to college. They just learned 3D on their own. Like they got an internship, learned 3D on the job, and then kind of just like rose from it from there. So, you know, it isn't, I think, necessary. I think for me, at least for art, what's necessary is you have to demonstrate the skills that like we're looking for. If like I need a 3D modeler and you can 3D model, then like I don't really care. For me personally, I don't care where your background is. I care like about you know, what your ability is. I hired someone for my last job who had only done like art school courses at night and things like that, but their portfolio just looked amazing. And so they applied, and I ended up picking them because they were just kind of exactly what I needed. So I did go to a traditional school, so you know, I don't want to. It seems a little hypocritical for me to say don't go to art school, but I will say the thing that I liked about I didn't go to a traditional gaming program. There are some, like there's DigiPen, I know USC has a good program out there, and there are more school programs. And I think the advantages you get when you go to those programs is a strong network right out of the gate, like people that want to be in gaming as well, people that are more connected to the industry, things like that. And it just kind of increases your potential to get a job just because you know more people and your reach is bigger, right? You know, I know like growing up, I grew up, you know, none of my family was in the arts. No one was in you know, the entertainment industry at all. And so it was really, really difficult. Like I was starting from absolute zero. So going to art school really helped me because then I can meet other artists, professors, people that could recommend me for work, things like that. And it really helped me build this network in this community, and also taught me how to work on deadlines. So I thought it was really valuable, even though it's expensive. Like I had to put myself through school using like scholarships and loans and stuff like that. And so, you know, that can seem very daunting, especially now because school prices are really, really high. But I just always saw it as like an investment in myself. And that's the kind of thing I recommend to people. But, you know, as an artist, if somebody was like me now, I would probably recommend that they take a few really targeted courses in a special subject, something like 3D modeling or concept art, just to like really create like a very solid fundamental skill that they can then use to kickstart their career. And that doesn't have to be a 4-year program. They could do it through a variety of different online courses and things like that. So education is important. How you approach that and how you approach your own training, I think is kind of up to you.
Yeah, I would love to echo that, Vincent, if I may.
Yeah, yes, you may.
Thank you. I really agree that I love that you said having the deadlines and structure that I believe college gave me, especially when I committed to changing my major to English and just utilizing those professors that you have access to that have that expertise, right, was just invaluable. And I think the deadlines of having to write under pressure and deliver is really valuable as well. And so I think it absolutely helped me become a better author, be able to think of long form and short form storytelling. So it made me practice all these different forms of thinking how to deliver an experience to different audiences. But then also on that same vein that you mentioned, Vincent, I don't think it's the only approach, because after I got out of college, I did exactly what you just said, was and continue to invest in myself. I continued to take out loans, and I continued to hire mentors that also provided me with skills and practice that wasn't college related, but was also applicable. So I hired an amazing professional whose name is Christy Golden. She's written all kinds of like Star Wars and World of Warcraft books. So I would pay her to be my mentor, my editor. And so I would have deadlines. I would deliver her scripts. She would edit them and give me feedback. And she showed me where I was failing, where I was succeeding, and then ways to hone my craft. So that was, I think both are really valuable. There's multiple ways to approach it, but I think the main thing is you have to really commit, be willing to sacrifice, be willing to, if you don't have the money, find a way, an extra job or, or the loans. I think it's really important. And then the last thing is seeing a need and then filling the need. Like if you see something in the gaming industry that has not yet been done, but you really want to bring that factor, finding those places where you can stand out and fill a need that isn't being filled can really grab the attention of hiring managers and game companies.
Yeah.
That's excellent. I'm going to pass it over to Laura in just a second, but I want to just double click on the cost concern too. I think that a lot of students undervalue or are just not confident enough in the possibilities of actually earning scholarships to be able to help support their schooling. And I know this for a fact because just yesterday in the BRIC Summit, one of the heads of Women in Animation, the organization, was on stage and she was kind of telling us about what they're doing. And they were going to be announcing some of the scholarships that they were going to be giving out. And they explicitly said that like we have trouble convincing college students to apply for our scholarships because they think they don't have a chance to be able to earn that scholarship, but they have money to give away. They really want to be giving. There's so many organizations like Women in Animation. There's so many great organizations specifically in gaming as well that want to give out this money for students to be able to help them in their schooling and in education, all the skill sets that we were just discussing. So I want to just encourage folks, like, do your research. Please look up those scholarships. Don't doubt yourself. There is a very high chance that there's a ton of other students that also feel that same way. And so your chances of earning it are much higher as a result of that. Laura, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is something I feel like super passionate about. For me, I think what matters most isn't whether you do an online class or traditional schooling, but it's like the quality of the classes you're taking is something that, like, as you guys are looking at what avenues you might want to go, just like really making sure you're doing your research before you enter a program or before you take a class. Check to see if the instructor who's teaching, how recently have they worked? Like, what is the software? Is the software they're teaching used right now by studios? I think that's a big thing that can kind of be glossed over sometimes, is just like doing that research ahead of time. Don't just get the degree for the degree, but make sure that it has a good solid foundation, because the last thing you want to do is spend all that money, have all that hope, and then like realize that what you learned isn't actually applicable to get you a job. So, I'd always just recommend doing your due diligence, whatever you decide to do. I don't think formal education is required. Like for me, I've done a lot of hiring throughout my career, and your portfolio is the most important thing. It's the first thing I'll look at, is like looking at your portfolio, those first 10 to 30 seconds of a reel, those first couple pages of, your PDF or your website. And then, I just don't think it's super required. I'm a huge advocate for getting more diversity into games, more diversity into the industry. And I know that to do that, we have to kind of change some systematic stuff about who's getting these opportunities. So to like broaden that view and bring in more talent from different industries to add to the whole culture, I think is just super important.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to double click on the portfolio points that you mentioned, Laura. I saw quite a few questions about what to include in the portfolio, what things stand out. That was actually our next question as well for the panelists. What are you looking for when you're looking to hire folks, and especially perhaps pertaining to entry-level roles, since there's so many folks that are looking to break into the industry or have their first role there. So just like the last question, I want to just kind of open this up to the larger group. If anybody has any specific thoughts on portfolios and what you look for in hiring, this is a great time to share that.
I have a lot of thoughts about portfolio. As you know,
Bring it
as
on,
you,
Vincent.
we
It's all you.
you want to hit something that Laura said about, making an impact in the first 30 to seconds to a minute. Oh, there's my dog. Let's see how much time he gives me. I'm going to say something, I don't want it to sound scary at all. It's just more of the truth, which is, I'm a pretty busy person, and I end up having for some roles, I might see 100 portfolios, so I've seen thousands of portfolios at this point. I only have probably about 1 minute to 2 minutes to really look at your portfolio the first time. So and that's just like a factor of time. I have a lot of meetings, I have to squeeze in portfolio reviews and stuff. So the first page of your portfolio is the absolute most important. And the first 2 images that somebody sees is the thing that's going to try and convince me to look deeper and then give you 5 more minutes. It's so important. A lot of people don't put their strongest image in right at the front of their portfolio. It's very simple advice. And the other thing I would say is, I would ask other people what your strongest image is, because sometimes what you think resonates with people may not resonate. Earlier in your career, you're still kind of cultivating your sense of taste and your skill set, and so there might be an image of yours that everyone loves, and that should be the one that's first, not the one that you love the most, because you're really trying to get a response out of another person, right? And I think at large, the biggest thing I look for is just competency. A lot of the times as an art director, when I'm looking at portfolios, I am not looking for a generally good artist. I am looking for a very, very specific artist. So recently I had a concept art environment concept artist role open. And so I need somebody that can draw landscapes really well, someone that can draw structures really well, props really well, do breakdowns, things like that. And 60% of the portfolios have nothing to do with environment. So I'm immediately going to pass on them. Now, I think that's okay for you to apply, but because if I see a good portfolio, I'm going to just start looking through it. It doesn't matter if it applies or not. I will remember that person and put it aside. But just know that if you apply for an environment artist role and it's only characters, you're probably not going to get the job. But oftentimes I'm looking for a very, very specific piece. So I think, when you're starting out in your career, kind of chasing the thing that you are most passionate about, whether it's characters or environments or visual effects, and just going really deep on that is such a benefit to you, because you grow a singular competency that can then grow out into larger competencies as an artist. So I'll hand it off to Christina.
I so agree with that. I think a focus is important, but certainly when people are just starting out, we understand that you're going to have an entire career ahead of you. So we're not expecting you necessarily to have award-winning art that you would see already in game, right? But what's important for us to see is that you have an understanding of foundations that we can build off of. So it's you have a strong understanding of anatomy, or you have a strong understanding of animation fundamentals, be it good demonstrating good timing, or demonstrating a strong understanding of composition, that kind of stuff. Just being able to demonstrate foundations helps us understand that there's somewhere basically you're moldable, and we don't have to start from the very beginning.
I think those are both such great points. I think the focused bit from Vincent is really hits for me, right? Where it's we're not necessarily hiring a generalist that can do everything. So really focus on something and get really good at that thing. And the other thing that I've found that is just so important is, and it can be tricky, is like if you want to work in a stylized game, or you want to work at Blizzard, or you want to work at Riot or something like that, like your work has to represent that. It's just so much easier for a hiring manager to like look at your thing and be like, oh, that can go directly into League of Legends, as opposed to like, well, it's maybe he's got the foundations. It can be really tricky, and I know that's like scary because it also kind of feels like it limits you. But it is something that is to that point of just, you have a minute or so to look at a portfolio. If it's not in style or even close to a style that you're working in, it often just gets passed over to someone who is focusing on that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, I think it's a great point too about like style. Like I'm just in my studio, we just went through this huge art pivot where our game was going to have one art style and then we shifted to another one. And so that was one where I was looking at a lot of portfolios that were like very animation, indie art focused, and we're not doing that style anymore. And so I was seeing a lot of really amazing people, and but it wasn't the style of the game we were chasing. So I think it's a really good point, you know. And the one thing I would add to what Devon said is that I think it's really important to me, at least, to see like, and I think as an artist, to like, you try and develop your own sort of vibe, you know, like if you could like League of Legends and you could not work on League of Legends, and that's totally fine, right? But if you want to work on League of Legends, your art should probably look like it looks like League of Legends. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do that, right? My very first portfolio was all watercolor narrative illustrations. They were basically like they were like children's book illustrations, but they were all individual and they all told their own stories. And that got me a job at Disney as a concept artist working on games. I had no game artwork in my portfolio, but what I was able to show them was I could tell stories with images, and that's the core competency. That's what got me the job. I didn't worry about, oh, am I drawing, you know, do I draw Ariel perfectly? It was more of like, you know, I didn't know at the time that my portfolio was perfect for what they needed, because they needed somebody to draw images to tell stories and concepts. And so, you know, sometimes it's just being more true to yourself. You'll find your opportunity. But it really just comes down to like crafting a snapshot of who you are as an artist.
I'll answer this really quickly because I know there's probably other stuff. One of my favorite, this is just like my tip. One of my favorite things that I did while I entered the industry and tried to jump between different studios was to find someone who had the job that I wanted and look at what their portfolio was. And then do that across several people of like, okay, there's 3 people on this team. Maybe I can find their portfolios or their online websites, look at their art, kind of see how they might have laid it out. So if you're unsure of what your portfolio should look like, that's always something that was helpful for me, because you can tell that they weren't all the same. Like there's no way each person on the team has the exact same portfolio, but you can definitely see maybe how they got hired for that, and like cultivating your own eye for your work and being able to see like what were quality pieces that maybe was a connection point or, you know, piqued the recruiter's interest is super helpful. So that's just something I did a lot that I think was good. So if you do that and you're curious, like it might be worthwhile.
Go ahead, Vincent.
I saw a question come up that I wanted to respond to. Is it for game development portfolio, should they have games that they have developed? Yes, absolutely. When you start your career, you don't have any of that, so that's okay. But as you take on new jobs, those professional jobs should take over pieces in your portfolio. Your portfolio should be sort of a living document, really. And you know, I had these like 12 images and I loved them. And then I started getting professional work and then I started plopping them in. And some of that work, I'm going to say, was not great. But what was great about it was that somebody paid me to do it and that I had to do it for someone else. It wasn't a thing I invented. It was something that had a practical application for someone else. And that has a lot of value. So if you've done something professional, I think it should go into your portfolio, because if anything, there are some pieces in your portfolio that are trying to say, I'm an amazing artist. And then there are some pieces in your portfolio that say, I know how to follow deadlines and people like to work with me. And I think that's a really important balance for me as an art director to look at.
These are some fantastic insights into like portfolios for visual arts. Is there any bits of advice or things that you guys would like to share in terms of hiring for folks that are perhaps not looking for visual art roles in particular? Go ahead, Genese.
Yeah, I could just add that, it's even if I love what was said earlier about trying to do the job that you want before you have it. I absolutely love that. And I do want to emphasize that a lot, because if you want to be a narrative designer or a writer or a story person in games and you have not yet done that job, again, you can dissect your favorite games, your favorite novels, your favorite media, and focus on the context of what moved you in the story or in the design of the missions, and then you practice emulating that, right? So in narrative design, it's telling a story through missions and story, and how you use the visuals, the action of the player, plus the dialogue, all of that stuff. It contains empathy. It contains the necessary skill to be able to know and use empathy to know what moves the player with the dialogue, with the mission, with the action, what moves me, right? Think about the things that fire you up with anger or sadness or makes you pause when you're consuming media, and then use that as practice to flowing out your own missions, right? Your own story in those missions, because you're basically being a narrative designer, being a storyteller, being a writer in games before you have that job. And then that can be used as your portfolio, right? You're showing, hey, I used World of Warcraft as my example, right? And I played the game and I took my favorite missions that moved me, and then I emulated that and created and designed my own missions with a narrative. And I present that as, see how this lives and breathes in the world of World of Warcraft, but it had my spin on it with my empathy and how I envisioned bringing alive a visual experience, a combat experience, and a narrative experience. And the hiring manager will feel your authenticity in that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Does anybody else have anything to add to this?
I had one more little story just about the impact of a good portfolio. It's a personal story, which is, when I was graduating high school, I was also taking classes at the art center near me, which was Pasadena Art Center. And my whole life, I was like, I'm going to go to Pasadena Art Center. I didn't. Spoiler alert, I didn't. But it was, but I was taking classes there. And so I got to know some of the guidance counselors at Pasadena Art Center. And so when I was about to graduate high school, I took my portfolio to them and asked them what their opinion of it was. And they gave me some really good advice, things to work on, stuff like that. And so post, high school, I didn't go to art school right away. I went to junior college for 2 years. I got out of school, I got a job, I paid for more art classes on my own, took a lot of art classes at this junior college, and then I reapplied 2 years later. Now that's a huge, Genese was talking about sacrifice, right? That's a big sacrifice. I was deferring my future. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew exactly where I wanted to go. I just couldn't afford it. I was like, I legitimately could not afford it at all. So my only pathway was, well, okay, I got to get a lot of scholarships. And so I just spent that 2 years making a really great portfolio. And then the reason why I didn't go to art center is because the school I did end up going to offered me 75% of my tuition. And so I went to that school instead. And and that was kind of interesting because my whole life I was going to go to this one school, but then this school allowed me to go there and not, actually attend the school, but also I got to move away from my home. I got to move to another city, and I had a whole amazing experience. So it's like a really unexpected kind of journey that I ended up going on. But, I think that level of sacrifice and investment paid off at the end because I was really dedicated to it. So I think, like a portfolio can really kind of change your outlook. And I think just like getting honest feedback from people and looking at your work honestly as well, like, and then taking the necessary steps. Cause I didn't do it overnight. It was like over 2 years, just like brick by brick, reshaping my portfolio, and it really paid off. So.
I love the brick by brick tie-in right there, Vincent. Thank you. Appreciate the little plug for the BRIC Foundation. Just kidding. Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, just as far as like talking about other career paths that aren't art or CG based, as far as like how to break in, my team on Magic, our narrative designers work very, very closely with game design. So for a TCG, I don't know if anyone watching is like interested in tabletop, or if you're mostly here for digital, which is totally fine. But I get asked a lot, like, do I need to play your game to be able to like help make your game? And for me, like, it's not required, but if you understand the game, it helps a lot to hire you, because then you know what we're doing, what we're making. Like, if you've never played League of Legends, it might be a little harder to design for League of Legends. So putting in that extra work ahead of time to really make sure, like, if you want to do game design or help write for characters that exist in the real world, like understanding them so you can speak to them in interviews or into whatever sort of documents you're submitting for your portfolio, putting in that extra work makes a huge difference. So.
I love that, Laura. Thanks for saying that, because I think you just kind of hit the nail on the head on some of the connective tissue that I'm hearing from all of the advice that we've heard so far. This idea of research, of really doing your research in advance. It's incredible the amount of information that's available at our fingertips right now on the internet. Like folks that are on the call right now, like the things that you have access to now, like I can probably safely say that the folks on this call perhaps didn't have even half of that when they were trying to make their way through this industry. So it's incredible how much information does exist, and the fact that you can look up what a specific studio's house style is like. You can play this plethora of these different kinds of games and these experiences. You can look up the portfolio of an artist that works on the team that you want to work on to be inspired, but to see how they essentially were able to position their work. There's so much at your fingertips, in addition to all the YouTube, the online schools, like the free resources. Like there's a ton of stuff, all these organizations that are all about uplifting underrepresented groups. There's so much that's there for you all to be able to take advantage of, and it's an exciting time to be somebody that's learning. So with that said, we have about 6 minutes left on the panel, and I just want to kind of pivot to some of the main bits of wisdom that perhaps each of you might have to share for our audience today. There's been a lot that's been shared in terms of your stories and some of the advice that you were giving already, but what are some key qualities or traits or recipe, the ingredients for the recipe to success that you would like to leave for our audience today? I'm going to go back to our original order, if you all don't mind. So I'm going to pass it off to Christina. What are your thoughts?
Sure. For me, like the key ingredients are vulnerability in like being able to be okay with not knowing the answer, for example, and having the courage to ask questions. And then adaptability, especially for me, since I didn't go to school, I learned everything on the job. But that was because I remained open to the idea that I don't know everything. And I found a lot of success that way. And I found a lot of success in the people that I work with in those particular skills.
That's awesome. Like +1 to both of those. And similarly for me, I think like critical thinking is just something, the more I'm surrounded by people who think really critically and deeply about like what they're doing, how it fits into the overall picture of everything. We've said a bunch of times how collaborative this industry is. It kind of elevates everybody when you have people thinking that way. It's been something I value more and more. And along with that, we've said it a bunch of times, but just like being fun and cool to work with and like being a good person. And I think a lot of what Christina touched on like really aligns with that sort of stuff as well. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, agree with what's said before me. The big thing I would say is hope, actually. And I think why I say that is because, getting in this industry, working in this industry, being an artist is difficult. Like it's hard. And but it's absolutely doable. I cannot stress enough how little I knew about this industry before when I was, probably all your ages. And so, you can figure this out and you can figure out how to do it. It's like the information's out there, and it's just up to you to have the tenacity to go out and find it and then figure out kind of your own path. You talk to anyone in a creative industry, and we all have a very different background. So, it is, I guess the biggest thing I'm going to say is like, it is absolutely achievable. It is a thing you can do, and just be prepared that there will be days where it'll be difficult and you'll wonder why the hell you're doing it. But then, I don't know, 15, 20 years later, you're on a panel talking to people and you can't believe it actually happened. Yeah.
Yeah, I think meditating on who you are, what drives you, what you envision your day-to-day looking like is really important. Like if you really find that you're the kind of person that wants to be able to count on routine and you want to be able to do the same thing, refine the same asset, or work on the same angle every day, it might be very different than someone who loves wearing lots of different hats and having to put out various fires that like pop up, you know, in the day to day. So I think that's really important, because sometimes what you think the job is from what you hear is very different than what the actual day to day is. So finding a mentor, asking to shadow people, going to game jams, and actually finding out like what is the image in your head of what a day-to-day narrative designer does compared to what they actually do could be the answer to, do I really want to do that or not? So knowing who you are, how you know what sparks you and drives you is really important. And then I had a woman, I'm a parent, and so a fellow parent at my daughter's school found out that I worked in video games, and she was like, oh wow, that must be the most easy and fun job in the world, right? Because so her perception of working in video games was very different than my reality. Like, I love my job, I love it absolutely, but me loving hard work and work ethic helps, because my job is very difficult. It's very taxing, it's very draining. The research, the communication, the constant hats I have to wear, it is hard. And I have 10-hour days, right? Like, so I often will have to delineate between what people think my job might be and what it actually is, and knowing if that is right for you.
Wow, that was so many good answers. What do I add on to that? For me, I think the big thing would be, you know, like this yes and mentality, especially as you're starting, this like curiosity to do things and to learn more. And for me, being from the Midwest, I definitely grew up with like this Midwest like lack of confidence. This is just me personally. I had a hard time volunteering and being like, yes, I'm the person for you, and you know, showing the things that I knew I had value for and I had skills, and not being egotistical but being confident. I think that goes a long way. I want to make sure anyone that like I bring on the team, they think they can do the job. Like, I think you can do. My advice is for you to think you can do the job. Kind of going to what Vincent said about the hope. Like, you have to believe you can do it. You have to believe you are the right candidate, and have that show through, and you know, feel like you've done everything you can to actually prepare yourself. Because there's nothing worse than getting the job and you haven't prepared yourself. So
those were such fantastic ingredients. I've just been typing up to the best of my ability, and I'm just going to share it in the chat for everybody. The panelists' recipe for success for everyone to keep track of, or to save for themselves if they'd like. So we are out of time. Thank you all so much for sharing your story and your advice and your wisdom. Especially thank you to all the panelists that were simultaneously answering questions in the Q&A feature. Y'all were on fire, and I loved it. We didn't even necessarily need a Q&A session because you took care of it so eloquently. So thank you all so much. Thank you to the BRIC Foundation for putting this panel on. As a reminder for folks, this will be available as a VOD on YouTube, on the BRIC Foundation's YouTube page. So you can watch it, rewatch it, take notes, compare your notes, etc. So with that said, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day. I believe we have one last AMA for the remainder of this of today's Talent Innovation Summit. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
thanks.
you.
Thanks, Narbeh.
Thank you.